I'm Peter Underwood. This is News from the Water. Canal and River Trust's chief executive is now nearly a decade into the job and has recently re-emerged into the public spotlight with a long corporate video of him reading a summary of the claims made in the Trust's annual Boaters Report.
As we publish our annual report and accounts for 2021 and the associated Boaters Report, and after a bumper summer for boating in which usage of the system reached record levels, I wanted to update you on how things are at the Trust.
And coming up, an online event being marketed as an annual conference where Richard Parry and Chair of Trustees Allan Leighton promise to answer pre-vetted questions from boaters, and that's set for next Monday afternoon. Now, cynics with long experience of CRT may suggest that the questions chosen might possibly be the ones Parry, Leighton and their public relations team want to answer. There are, however, many questions which do need answers, and we've been compiling a short list so we can help them. Let's start with the current annual report, which implies that the Trust spent over £50 million, nearly 3 times as much as previously on major infrastructure repairs this year. But once the provision for spending in future years is stripped out, it turns out that in reality it's spending £2 million less than it spent in its first year of operation. So why do you juggle the numbers to hide the stark reality that less is now being spent on the waterway structure than it was when you started? And then another one: how can boaters put any faith in the Trust when it makes public promises but then reneges on them within weeks? Now, this refers of course to the so-called safety zones on the River Lee in London, where the Trust assured boaters they wouldn't go ahead with new mooring restrictions without consulting a new joint body of river users, only to attempt to impose restrictions that would mean the loss of well over 200 mooring spots, using the pretense that those restrictions were in some way historic. And it would be interesting to hear the two men explain why Canal and River Trust gets into such a mess over official figures. Why did the two of them change figures in the annual report from last year when making an official submission to the Charity Commission? And why did Allan Leighton write a letter for the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs explaining changes to heritage data as agreed with DEFRA Direct, and then refuse to answer questions about it? And why has the Trust's top legal man, Tom Deards, now asserted the letter wasn't sent? And why does CRT's board of Trustees have no written record of approving the altered report? Now, the Trust has authorised the sale of at least 60 listed waterways buildings since 2012, including just last week 2 listed properties in London, and this week another at the top of the Tardebigg Lock flight. Yet CRT has a clear, legal, charitable objective to conserve and protect its heritage. Now, it seems from their discussions with the IWA that CRT claim to only sell if the cost of maintenance exceeds income. Yet a quick check online shows that all the recent sales were clearly producing rental income that exceeded the costs of maintenance, £35,000 a year. So why are they selling the family silver? Many boaters observe that what they think is a clear reduction in services being offered to them, whether it's water points, Elson disposal or rubbish. Despite asking how many operational facilities blocks CRT now has and how that compares with 10 years ago, and whether the services at each are still open block have been reduced or removed, the Trust claims not to know the answer. Surely that's a basic measure of their effectiveness, and they must keep track of such things. And another question: Canal and River Trust is now spending substantial amounts on advertising, especially on social media, to promote its well-being agenda and green credentials. And Mr. Parry claims in his recent broadcast to the boating nation that
we will be arguing that the scale of funding and the spending on the network must be maintained, or indeed increased over time, as the impact of the climate and the general environment and commercial pressures are different today from when the Trust was created. As well as demonstrating the benefits that the waterways offer, we need to show government that the network and neighbouring communities could be at risk if we're unable to secure a continued grant. Of course, no government will fund canals just because they are there. We have to articulate their role in society today and in the future, how they help physical and mental health to save costs in the NHS, how they support active travel and sustainable transport, reducing emissions, that they host essential services and utilities, and support renewable energy, urban cooling and biodiversity, providing corridors for wildlife migration through towns and cities. Given where our canals are located, they can contribute to government levelling up policies and provide nature on the doorstep for millions of people, often in places where access to the outdoors is at a premium.
Yet there is little evidence in the public domain that DEFRA or the politicians in power have any inclination to continue to hand over the £50 million and more every year to the waterways. Isn't this all a tremendous gamble with a vital part of our national heritage? And Mr. Parry also paints a picture of a brighter future for the waterways.
Of course, works on this scale aren't new, but over the next few years, the scale of our infrastructure works will increase steadily to unprecedented levels as we direct more and more funding to safeguarding the condition of our waterways.
But how can we take that assurance seriously when we see more system failures every month? Canal and River Trust has acquired a reputation for factual distortion, and there is no indication that its gamble on extracting cash for well-being and green initiatives will succeed with a government which has done nothing to indicate its support for the waterways and which clearly doesn't even see them as part of its agenda. So there are some of the vital questions unlikely to be asked or answered next week. I'm sure you can think of others. It's difficult to avoid the conclusion that this may well be another exercise designed to give the impression that it's possible to influence and hold to account the Canal and River Trust juggernaut, when that's clearly untrue. That's it for this week. Talk to you again soon.
We need video and photos of all aspects of the waterways. Email files to peterunderwood2@gmail.com with your name and a brief description of it and where and when it was shot.